everyone. Welcome to the press briefing on the October 2020 Asia and Pacific Regional Economic Outlook. I'm Keiko Utsunomiya from the Communications Department. Thank you for taking your time to join us today. We have received some questions in advance, but please send your questions in writing if you're on the IMF Press Center. And this time, we are also taking your questions via video or audio. So please raise your hand or send your questions in a short message using the chat function if you are on the WebEx. Now, let me introduce today's speaker. I'm here with Mr. Jonathan Ostry, Acting Director of the Asia and Pacific Department. He will give a short opening remarks before we take questions from you. Jonathan?
Thank you, Keiko. So warm greetings from Washington and good evening to you in Asia. It is a pleasure to be with you and to give you some of the highlights of the IMF's Regional Economic Outlook for Asia Pacific. The Asia Pacific region has been hit hard by the pandemic. You've seen our projections with regional growth at minus 2.2%. 2020 will be remembered as the most severe contraction in generations. Asia is not alone in suffering a huge contraction. The world is in this crisis together, and we will only emerge from it together. This is as true of the health crisis as it is of the economic crisis. But Asia is at a different stage from the rest of the world. The region went into this crisis first, and it already can offer some valuable lessons for the world. 3 lessons stand out. First, an early public health response, when infection rates are still low, seems to be an essential stepping stone to flattening the virus curve. Second, relaxing containment measures only after the virus has been suppressed and with appropriate complementary policies, such as broad testing and contact tracing capacity, seems to be associated with better economic outcomes. On both counts, Asia has done well in comparison to other regions, probably due to its experience from previous pandemics. Third, fiscal support has also been critical to reduce economic costs and underpin the recovery. Here, Asia has pulled its weight, with Asia's share of announced stimulus broadly in line with Asia's weight in the global economy. But more hard work lies ahead. Let me stress 4 challenges that must be confronted. First, Asia's labor markets have been hit hard, especially so for female and younger workers. Inequality in Asia had been rising even before the crisis, and the pandemic is hitting those at the bottom even harder than the rest. The limited reach of social safety nets and large size of informal sectors is proving to be a roadblock to supporting the most vulnerable at this critical time. Robotization, which is already well advanced in Asia, may displace even more lower-skilled workers going forward. The resulting higher levels of inequality could even lead to social unrest, itself an obvious impediment to sustained economic growth. Second, geopolitical, trade, and technology tensions are threatening Asia's export-driven growth model. Further decoupling across global technology hubs would have serious implications for the region's growth potential going forward. Third, Asia's corporate and household sectors entered the crisis with too much leverage on their balance sheets, and the crisis is amplifying this vulnerability. And fourth, public debt burdens are also a concern for a number of emerging markets and low-income countries in the region. These challenges are important drivers of the downgrade to our forecast. New information since our mid-year update includes second quarter national accounts in the region's economies. Most notable among these data is a much sharper contraction in India, whose economy shrank by an unprecedented 24% year-on-year in the second quarter, and where we now project a contraction of 10.3% this fiscal year. China, which suffered the blow from the pandemic earlier than other countries, has seen a very strong recovery since the first quarter lockdown, and growth has now been revised up to 1.9% this year, a rare positive figure in a sea of negatives. For 2021, our projection of 6.9% growth is slightly stronger than we had in June. But in combination with the deep recessions this year, it nevertheless implies that a number of economies will still be smaller at the end of 2021 than before the pandemic. Generally speaking, our projections assume that domestic demand remains subdued given continued social distancing and containment measures, weak tourism, and a rather lackluster recovery by historical standards in global trade. Economic scarring seems a near certainty at this point. Our projections suggest that potential output by the middle of this decade could be some 5% lower than before the pandemic, due to the fall in labor force participation and weak confidence that dims private investment. So how then can Asia confront these challenges? Foremost, policymakers must not lose sight of the fact that this health crisis is far from over. Job one is therefore to sustain strong health policies until the pandemic is well under control. Countries need to plan now to secure and distribute vaccine supplies quickly as they become available and, in some cases, with multilateral support. Beyond managing the health crisis, I would emphasize 5 messages for economic policy. First, because the recovery is far from entrenched, macroeconomic policy support should not be withdrawn prematurely. Both fiscal and monetary policy need to play their part. Second, greater efforts to better target fiscal support to protect the most vulnerable, youth, women, and informal workers who have taken the biggest hit, is essential. Targeted support provides greater bang for the buck, both in protecting lives and livelihoods. This is important because, to varying degrees, fiscal space is scarce everywhere, and rising inequality could yet turn acute. Third, vigilance against emerging credit risks from corporates and households remains essential, given potential impacts on financial institutions, particularly if downside risks to growth materialize. Fourth, unsustainable public debt should be addressed proactively, as the clear message from history is that delays in dealing with this problem only grow with time. And fifth, structural economic policies need to be geared to the world of tomorrow, not the world of yesterday. This means facilitating corporate restructuring and resource reallocation, including to sectors that will pave the way for stronger, medium-run, inclusive, green growth. Thank you, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Jonathan. I would like to go straight to WebEx. Ms. Leika Kihara, she from Reuters Japan, she has some questions about the region as a whole. Leika? Go ahead, please. Leika, if you're there, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting myself. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, please.
I have a question about China and its impact on Asia. So as you mentioned, China has recovered faster from the pandemic's pain than the rest of the world. How much boost would China's rebound give to Asian economies? And What are the key risks besides the pandemics that could weigh on Asian economies next year?
Okay. Sorry, Jonathan. I have very similar, I believe, related questions from Mr. Anthony Rowley from South China Morning Post, and I see him on WebEx as well. So could we take his question before your answer? Anthony, are you there? Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, it's a very broad question, but obviously the Chinese economy at the moment is doing relatively well. And back in the global financial crisis in 2008, China acted as a dynamo, really, for the regional economy, indeed for the global economy. So if this situation continues for any length of time, presumably China's importance as a dynamo of growth is going to become more and more apparent. And I wonder what impact that is going to have really on China's wider economic role in Asia. In other words, will China become even more important as a trade pole, as an investment pole than it is at the moment? And likewise, the United States become progressively less important economically.
Very good. So thank you for those broad questions related to China and the region. Let me start by delineating two separate issues, I think. One is what China's role is near term, and then more the risks for the region and China's role within it beyond the near term. So as both questioners sort of point out, China has recovered first. It's a very large economy, both globally and for the region. And because it experienced the pandemic first and dealt with the pandemic vigorously quite early, the trough in economic activity for China, its ability to reopen, occurred much earlier than for other countries in the region and globally. And so this has meant that the recovery, and we've now seen 2 quarters, the second and third quarter of 2020, with very impressive growth from China, which naturally, given its role in the region, is having positive spillovers for the region and for commodity prices and for broadly participants in the global value chains that China is a big part of. A lot of the exports of China, however, are very specifically related to medical equipment and home electronics, the things that are really being used by the world as a whole during the pandemic. And the half-life of these exports is probably pretty short. The demand for lots of medical equipment and lots of home electronics will eventually peter out, and so we will move to a different phase. China itself is kind of midstream in a process of its own rebalancing. And it has multiple facets. It's a rebalancing from more export and investment-led growth to a bigger role for consumption. It's a rebalancing from a large role of state enterprises in the economy to one where private demand is going to be have a big role in promoting and sustaining growth. And indeed, our projections for China beyond the near term assume a smooth handover from publicly generated growth to private demand. We have seen some broadening of growth in the third quarter. In the second quarter, investment was taking a center stage, and public fiscal policy was also having a big role. And we've seen consumption, while still lagging behind, beginning to show that it is starting to grow in the third quarter, and that is a very welcome sign, including even in some contact intensive service sectors, which is very good. Now, in terms of the regional aspect of all this, there are a lot of things going on in the background that will shape China's role in the region going forward and over the medium term. Our Rio discusses the role of trade and technology tensions. It discusses the role of debt overhangs, very stretched balance sheets of corporate and household sectors. And all of these factors are going to shape global value chains as countries in the region adapt their growth models to a new environment. And so there is a lot of uncertainty about China's role in the region, and how global value chains will be reconfigured going forward. So I'm afraid it's a little too soon to prognosticate about where the region will settle on China and its role in global value chains, in regional value chains, supply chains, a couple years from now.
Okay, next, turn to a question on Japan. This is from Masaki Kondo, GG Press. How different would Japan's economic outlook be if the Olympic would not be held in 2021, or significantly scaled back in its scope and size? And also, he has a question of labor policies. How should Japan go about policies to increase income policies?
Very good. Thank you for those two questions on Japan. Since the first one is on the Olympics, which is an event that brings all the countries of the world together, let me also take this opportunity to welcome Japan's commitment to multilateralism, its engagement in multilateral efforts to promote rules-based international trade, its recent agreements with the European Union and the United Kingdom, and its tremendous support for the low-income countries, highly indebted countries through the PRGT and CCRT trusts at the fund, and its support for capacity development in the face of the evolving needs of many countries during this pandemic. So this is really a very welcome example to the world. On the Olympics per se, let me first of all say that Japan has addressed the pandemic in a very effective way, but it is not a way that has been pursued by many other countries. It has been extremely effective in Japan, and it hasn't been based on hard lockdowns, hard nationwide lockdowns, as has been the case in some other countries. And it goes to show that different countries can choose different paths to flattening the virus curve. And so this is yet another example of effective health policy. On the Olympics, the infrastructure has largely been completed, and that would be a big channel through which the Olympics is affecting Japan's growth. And so that is really in the rearview mirror rather than going forward. So a key channel would be tourism inflows if the Olympics were to be delayed. And I think in the grand scheme of things, there would be an effect, but it is likely to be quantitatively small in terms of the aggregate headline GDP numbers. It's an excellent question on incomes policy, on how to raise incomes in Japan. This has two facets. There is the immediate issue of supporting incomes of the most vulnerable during this very difficult time when those at the bottom are suffering the most in terms of lost income opportunities. And I think Japan's measures early in the crisis have been very effective, and they need to be sustained until people can return to work and the economy is more advanced in its recovery, which the very proactive health policy has laid a clear foundation for. But beyond that, there is the perennial and longstanding issue of generating more favorable wage and price dynamics in Japan, and obviously continued vigorous action by the Bank of Japan to underpin positive increases in the general level of prices, and having then more favorable dynamics between prices and wages, perhaps supported by incomes policies that could, rather than keep wage growth down, actually help to support wage growth, would be something, and other policies like minimum wages and administered wages. All of these things could be thrown into the mix to support incomes going forward.
Thank you, Jonathan. I would like to go to Takeshi Kawanami of Nikkei. He has a question on Vietnam. Are you there? Mr. Kawanami, please. Maybe not. He has sent a question online. Let me read question myself. Vietnam has kept economic growth this year under pandemic. What's the key point to sustain the strong economy?
Thank you. That is a question that is important for Vietnam, but I think there's also broader lessons for the world. So we've spoken about China, which is, as I said in my opening remarks, a rare positive in a sea of otherwise negative growth numbers for this year. But I'll take the opportunity of this question on Vietnam to point to another positive, a very welcome one at that, and one where we see actually upside risks given recent data, including for the third quarter. The way I would summarize the lessons from Vietnam is really taking the pandemic extraordinarily seriously very, very early on. Right at the top of the year, taking very bold steps to contain the virus, to earn the trust, which I think has been earned of its Vietnam citizens, with media campaigns and so forth, and a broad range of containment measures, which have been extraordinarily effective, and effective also through time, so that when many months later, the virus reemerged in some parts of Vietnam, like Da Nang and elsewhere, the authorities were again incredibly prepared and proactive in taking the appropriate containment measures, which ran the gamut of locking down certain areas, tracing, testing, quarantines, and so forth. So this is a country that really took this extraordinarily seriously, was very proactive, and thus very effective. And the benefit was not only in a tremendous health response and results on the ground in terms of the health of Vietnamese, but also that it could reopen its economy rather earlier than most, just like in this respect, like China. And the benefits are clear in that Vietnam has enjoyed a faster rebound and what seems to be a more robust rebound than many. Vietnam has a strong role in trade, including of products like electronics, like pharmaceuticals that are in high demand in this period, and of course has taken full advantage of that. Its policies, including support for the most vulnerable, have been very proactive and again very effective, even within its limited means. So the recipe and the lesson from Vietnam is that the pandemic needs to be taken very seriously, proactively, early, and that is what lays a firm foundation for recovery, in addition to supporting policies from fiscal and infrastructure and so forth. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. I want to stay in Southeast Asia. I see Mr. May Kumakara from Phnom Penh Post. Kumakara, can you ask questions on WebEx, please? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I got a few questions regarding the emerging economy because right now I will see that there is no vaccine available for coronavirus, and we know that most of the emerging economy like Cambodia mainly relying on the export and the inflows of the tourism sectors. What are the IMF evaluate the impact of the coronavirus to the emerging economy like Cambodia, and what are the policy response that the IMF can recommend to the local governments? And on the October 15th, the IMF just revised the projection for Cambodia to minus 2.8 from the previous projection, mean that it's a bit better than before, and it will be rebound to 5.6% next year. Can you share with me what are the key elements that for the revision, and what are the key sectors that you think that it should be rebound for next year? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that question. For Cambodia, I think some of the factors that have affected our projections are the collapse in tourism, which obviously affected Cambodia's economy significantly, and the impact on its non-tourist exports, including of garments, for example, when since our previous update, there were numerous order cancellations, and these are both tourist and goods exports, I think, lie behind the weaker outlook. In terms of the policy imperatives, I think again what we have advised is a careful prioritization of expenditure to make sure that fiscal resources reach those who are most vulnerable, those at the bottom of the income scale, those in the informal sectors, and so forth, whose employment opportunities may have been really hit very badly, and with the sort of baseline recovery in global demand for some of Cambodia's main exports like garments, and some recovery in tourism, it should be possible for the recovery that we envisage for 2021 to materialize.
I believe Mr. Ben Arnold de Vera on WebEx has a related South Asia question. Mr. de Vera, are you there?
Right. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Very
Hello?
Yes. If you
Go
can
ahead,
speak louder.
please.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Mr. de Vera? We can hear you. Okay. We have some audio problem. Let's move on, and if possible, we will come back to you, Mr. De Vera. Next, I would like to read a question we received online. Ms. Heather Scott from AFP is asking about the potential potential for rising social unrest in Asia, a region where we already have seen a lot of unrest in recent years. Are governments doing enough to head off what could be an explosive situation? And how long will it take a country like India to reverse the surge in poverty that undermined many years of progress?
Well, thank you for that, and I hope we come back to the question on Nepal if possible. But let me take this broader question on poverty and so forth, and social unrest. Indeed, we've all seen the very disturbing headlines about how this pandemic is likely to push very large numbers of people into extreme poverty and reverse gains achieved over many years in reducing extreme poverty in the world. And indeed, it is quite likely that many of these additions to the extreme poverty group will be in South Asia. And it is a very disturbing scenario. There's a part of Heather's question when she asks about how long will it take for this devastating increase in extreme poverty to be unwound. And there's a sense that perhaps once we get back on a growth path in Asia and South Asia, we can assume that the increase in poverty will be reduced or reversed. And to be sure, a pickup in growth will help, but it will not be sufficient to really address the issue of rising extreme poverty. And that is why we have consistently stressed during this pandemic that countries need to be very proactive in using their scarce fiscal resources to reach those who are in danger of falling into this group of extremely poor. The time is not, there cannot be a delay in this, and really this is an urgent problem. And it is a problem that, has to be seen against the background of rising inequality in the Asian region which long predates this pandemic. And the reason that that is important is because, there is likely to be some point beyond which further increases in inequality may well seriously undercut sustainable growth, including by leading to social unrest, as Heather's question suggested. We have to be humble about exactly what this threshold is, but in the regional economic outlook, we have some analysis of this, which suggests that a number of countries in the region might have pre-existing levels of inequality that would generate some concern. Let me just finally close by saying that these trends are not the destiny of countries. There is a lot that countries can do and should be doing in targeting their fiscal support to those at the bottom and taking steps really through social programs to reverse and mitigate these very unwelcome trends that we've been seeing. Thank you.
Thank you. Staying in South Asia, I want to take a question from Nepal. Mr. Sega Gahimi, Republica, is asking, the fund has projected 2.5% growth in the current fiscal year for Nepal after the growth falling flat in 2020. As coronavirus cases are on a rising trend, how severe the economic fallout could be, and what recommendations do you have for Nepali government to manage its finance? Also, the second quick question, Nepal is one of the major remittance receiving countries. How much remittances could be hit due to impacts of coronavirus in international labor markets?
Very good. The data on Nepal and our projections are based on the financial year, the fiscal year, and obviously the pandemic has straddled 2 fiscal years, and the numbers that were in the question really show the impact of the pandemic across these 2 years. It's worth noting, as the questioner does, that the cases are still rising in Nepal, and to that degree, I would say that there are some downside risks associated with the health side. On the role of policy, it has to, as elsewhere, be firmly dedicated to flattening the virus curve, to making sure that the health of Nepalese are protected and the health risks of the population are contained, and that, again, very targeted, proactive approach to redress those who are suffering the most, those at the bottom, are the order of the day. On remittances, these have been reasonably volatile recently, and the future for remittances, I think, will depend a lot on the source countries, including India, Malaysia, and the GCC countries. So I think what we will see for remittances into Nepal will depend a lot on the growth outlook in where the Nepalese are working abroad.
One more question from Bangladesh, South Asia. I see Mr. Kamal Sariar, Samoy TV. If you're online, please go ahead.
Hello, are you hearing me?
Yes. Please go ahead.
Recently, I am Outlook said that Bangladesh is set to overtake India in terms of per capita gross domestic product GDP in 2020 2021 years. But I want to know that if Bangladesh want to continue this progress, uh, what should have to do in Bangladesh government, and what is the challenges for this country to getting better economy?
So if I understood you, sorry, the sound is very faint. If I heard you correctly, your question is if Bangladesh wants to keep the GDP progress, what should the government have to do, and what challenges for this country for getting better economy?
Yeah, that's my question.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you for that question. I would say that the advice for Bangladesh is fairly similar to the advice we give, to many developing countries, which is first and foremost to contend with the pandemic. And make sure that the containment efforts are yielding the desired results. Protect the most vulnerable, and use scarce fiscal resources to target those most affected by the pandemic. Beyond the short term, sustained increases in per capita incomes, to which you referred at the beginning, will need to be underpinned by supply side policies, including policies to make the economy more efficient through a favorable business climate, through further opening to trade and direct investment, the kinds of policies that we believe are ones that portend a sustained increase in the efficiency and productivity of the economy over the medium term. Thank you.
Okay, let me turn to the Pacifics. We have received a question from Mr. Anish Chand, Fiji Times. The question in gist is that how is Fiji showing signs of recovery, in which areas and what speed? Do you agree with the view that Fiji's reliance on tourism has been the sole factor that COVID-19 has hugely impacted in its economy?
Thank you for that question. So Fiji is one of the countries that has been hit hardest in the Asia Pacific region by the pandemic and the fallout from the pandemic. That is not because of large numbers of cases and an out of control virus in Fiji itself. It is really because of the dependence of Fiji's economy, like so many Pacific islands and some of the ASEAN countries, on tourism, which has basically ground to a halt since March. And indeed, tourism is a marker, I think, in the Asia Pacific region that significantly affects the Pacific Islands and some of the ASEAN countries, and really is hitting their economies very hard. If we are honest, we do not know precisely when and how tourism will recover, but we have assumed that there will be some recovery in tourism next year. The other thing that has affected Fiji specifically are its other exports, non-tourist exports, and there the slowing of the global economy and demand for those products, I think, is having a further negative impact on Fiji as on others. And we would expect a recovery in the demand for those products, like sugar and others, to follow the path that the global economy as a whole follows. But the Pacific Islands as a group speaking not just of Fiji, but more broadly, face very steep challenges going forward. They have a record of rather chronically lower growth than many emerging and developing countries. And it is likely, and this likely reflects their lack of diversification, their limited capacity, their remoteness, and so forth. But it has an implication for the speed with which they are likely to recover following the pandemic. And our sense is that it may be a longer ascent for these countries than we might see in other places. And this is something, obviously, that the fund is very much engaged in with the authorities, especially given the financial challenges that it may pose in terms of the balance sheets of corporates and the public sector.
Okay. We are almost running out of time. I want to go back to Mr. De Vera, if you are online, and then, if I may, have Ms. Weir Gur after Mr. De Vera. Mr. De Vera, are you?
Economic rebound, we all know that China's economy grew 0.7% from a year ago in the first 3 quarters. In the meantime, Europe and the US are still dealing with this potential second wave. So I'm just wondering how the pandemic is or will reshape the global and regional supply chains, and also how the weakness in the dollars, or even there is discussion about dollar crash in the year of 2021, will impact the regional economy. Thank you.
Okay, shall I?
Yes.
So let me go back to the question about countries that are still have not flattened the virus curve, that are still struggling with a health crisis that is not fully under control, and whether there's really a trade-off between an economic recovery and dealing with the health crisis. To be sure, different countries will approach this differently, and we've seen a variety of different approaches across the Asia-Pacific region. But I would conclude that there is no solid, firm foundation for economic recovery in the midst of an uncontrolled pandemic. So it is a prerequisite for a firm economic recovery that the virus curve be flattened, and even early successes in this respect there needs to be ongoing vigilance, because, as we know, this is a marathon and not a sprint, and the virus rears its ugly head from time to time when we do not expect it, and health policy needs to be very vigilant and proactive. On the question on the reconfiguration of supply chains, what I wanted to say, and let me clarify it further, is simply that this is a time of maximum uncertainty. In such a time, investors who need to make decisions about where to locate production people are holding back. And that is why private investment is so weak. And until a lot of this uncertainty is resolved, and that includes not just the pandemic, but very fundamental areas to do with trade, geopolitics, technology, all of these things, we have a lot of uncertainty in those areas. We know that the global economy and Asia specifically will benefit from multilaterally based solutions, rules-based solutions that are owned by all the key players in the world. And we are not there yet. We need to get there. Because getting to those multilateral rules-based solutions owned by all is really a prerequisite for getting over this extreme uncertainty that is holding back investment and productive, sustained prosperity.
Okay, this will conclude our press briefing today. I'm so sorry that we could not take all your questions. I trust all of you have access to the Regional Economic Outlook on the IMF website. Jonathan's blog is posted there too, so please take a look. The transcript of this briefing and the video recording will be made available shortly. Again, thank you very much for joining us today. Stay safe and see you next time.